Today we receive the news that everyone who has been paying attention has been waiting for. Drake's defamation lawsuit against UMG over Not Like Us has been officially dismissed. The case is closed. And for everyone who has been following this story since the beginning, this is the moment we were waiting for. One of the most damaging and frankly embarrassing chapters in recent hip-hop history has just reached its conclusion. And the verdict could not be more decisive.
Leave a like because this outcome matters, not just for the drama of it, but for what it means for the culture going forward. The lawsuit has been dismissed by Judge Vargas, the very judge Drake's camp was putting all their faith in. And rather than paraphrasing the ruling, let's just look at what it actually says. Because the language Judge Vargas used is precise, direct, and permanent, and it deserves to be on the record in full.
This case arises from perhaps the most infamous rap battle in the history of the genre, the deeply personal war of words between Aubrey Drake Graham and Kendrick Lamar Duckworth in the spring of 2024. Over 16 days, 8 diss tracks were exchanged, with escalating rhetoric and loaded accusations. The final song in that exchange, Not Like Us by Kendrick Lamar, delivered the decisive blow. It became a cultural phenomenon, achieving extraordinary commercial success and critical acclaim that few records in recent memory have matched.
Both artists hold recording contracts with defendant UMG Recordings. Drake brought this action for defamation, harassment in the second degree, and a violation of New York general business law. And the court's conclusion on all of it is this: the allegedly defamatory statements contained in Not Like Us are non-actionable opinion. That is the ruling, that is the finding, and that is the end of the case.
The motion to dismiss is granted, and that single sentence changes everything about where Drake stands right now, not just legally, but professionally, culturally, and institutionally. Because the court did not narrow the claims or send them back for revision, it dismissed them entirely. That is not a technical defeat. That is a fundamental rejection of the entire legal theory Drake's team spent a year constructing. And for everyone who co-signed this lawsuit and told Drake it was a legitimate path forward, that answer is now definitively on the record.
The specific language of the ruling, non-actionable opinion, is worth sitting with for a moment, because it belongs in the same conversation as every bar from Kendrick Lamar and Pusha T that has publicly defined what Drake is and what he has become in this culture. A judge has now stated in an official legal document that the content of Not Like Us does not even qualify as a cognizable defamation claim. Not that the claims lacked merit, not that the evidence was insufficient, that the entire premise was legally untenable from the beginning. That is the level of rejection this ruling represents.
And the full weight of what Drake sacrificed to get to this outcome is genuinely staggering when you lay it out clearly. His credibility in hip-hop? Spent. His institutional relationships? Damaged beyond easy repair. His legal fees? Enormous. UMG's legal costs? Partially on him as well. And the return on all of that investment is a dismissal that confirms the court did not even think the case warranted a trial. This is the outcome of betting your entire remaining credibility on a lawsuit that the legal system just rejected in its entirety.
And the thing that makes this so difficult to accept from Drake's perspective, and so clarifying from everyone else's, is that none of this had to happen. After the beef, Kendrick was number 1, and that was settled. But Drake was still sitting comfortably in second position on one of the most powerful rosters in music. He still had a commercial lane. He still had label support. He could have made music, stayed relevant, and preserved the business relationships that made his career what it was. Instead, he filed a lawsuit. And now the chips he wagered on that lawsuit are gone, permanently.
Because every move Drake has made since the beef ended has followed the same pattern and produced the same result, trying to convince people he won, spreading narratives about Kendrick, building counterclaims through media proxies, filing this lawsuit and extending it through motion after motion for nearly a year. Every single one of those moves has left him more isolated, more discredited, and more commercially compromised than before he made it. And this dismissal is not just the end of the lawsuit, it is the end of the last institutional mechanism Drake had available to try and undo what happened.
The UMG relationship from this point forward is genuinely one of the most important stories to follow, because the fractures were already significant before this ruling arrived. Drake has been publicly antagonizing label executives, the industry has been distancing itself steadily, and UMG still controls meaningful portions of his catalog, which means regardless of how damaged a relationship is, Drake does not have the leverage to walk away cleanly or to demand anything from a position of strength. And with this dismissal now added to everything else, any timeline that existed for Iceman or any other Drake release has just become considerably less certain.
Because the label controls the infrastructure. Without their active support, the promotional machinery that turned Drake's music into hits, regardless of whether the music deserved to be a hit, is simply not available to him. And Drake has now managed to lose the organic support of the culture, the interest of the broader listening public, and the goodwill of the label apparatus simultaneously. 3 foundational pillars removed from the same career in roughly 2 years. And whatever move he makes next is going to have to be made without any of those 3 things supporting it.
But stepping back from the Drake analysis for a moment, the most significant thing about today is not what it means for his career, it is what it means for hip-hop as an art form. Because the real winner in this ruling is not just Kendrick Lamar, it is every rapper who wants to say something real and pointed without having to calculate the legal exposure first. The threat Drake tried to hang over competitive expression in this genre has been removed, and that removal matters enormously for the health and the future of this culture.
Because consider what would have happened if this had proceeded to trial. Every artist evaluating whether to record a diss track would have had to consider whether their label's legal team would approve the language first. Every competitive bar would have been filtered through liability review before anyone heard it. The entire ecosystem of honest, direct, unfiltered competitive expression that hip-hop is built on would have been placed under a legal cloud that no amount of artistic intent could have fully cleared. The fact that a judge looked at Drake's case and said, "No, these statements are protected opinion," is one of the most important things that could have happened for the genre going forward.
And while the dismissal is unambiguously good news, the damage this lawsuit caused along the way is real, and it does not disappear with the ruling. There is going to be hesitation, particularly among artists with less institutional protection. But what this ruling establishes is a clear principle that a diss track is not a deposition, that rap beef is not a defamation claim, that the culture has the right to express itself as it always has. That principle is now on the record. And in spaces where tensions are building and artists are trying to decide whether they can say what they need to say, that record matters.
The industry is going to adapt from this in its own way, and some of those adaptations are going to serve label interests more than artist interests. That is predictable and worth watching. But within the culture itself, among the people who make and love this music and who understand what it is supposed to be, today is a good day, a genuinely good day. And after everything hip-hop has been put through over the last 2 years, specifically because of Drake, that is something worth acknowledging without qualification.
Hip-hop retains its voice today. Beefs can still be settled on the record rather than in court. Diss tracks can still say what they need to say. And Drake's fan base, the people who spent a year insisting this lawsuit was righteous and that the judge would see the truth, now have to absorb another major public loss on top of everything that has already accumulated. The cultural verdict came in over a year ago. The legal verdict has now arrived to confirm it. Their guy has never been lower, and both judgments say the same thing.
Kendrick Lamar was spotted at a soccer match around the same time this ruling dropped, headphones in, phone in hand, completely composed, watching the game like someone who has nothing unresolved and nothing to be anxious about. And knowing how private and controlled Kendrick always is in public, how little he ever performs his emotions regardless of the circumstances, seeing him that settled at that specific moment raises a genuine question. Did he and his team already know this was coming before it was announced? That level of composure at that exact time does not feel coincidental.
Because the stakes of this ruling extending beyond the current dispute cannot be overstated. Had Drake gotten this in front of a jury, had defamation claims based on diss track lyrics been allowed to proceed, every future artist targeted in a song by someone with resources would have had a legal template to pursue. Labels would have had unprecedented leverage over what their artists say in competitive contexts. And the creative freedom that defines what rap is at its core would have been structurally threatened in a way that would have been very difficult to reverse. This dismissal protected Kendrick. It also protected everyone who comes after him.
And even with all of that settled, one question that will not fully leave me alone is what Drake does next. There was reportedly a point in this whole saga where the label itself told Drake that if his problem was with Kendrick Lamar specifically, he should stop going through the label and take it directly to the source. And now, with the UMG case dismissed and every other available mechanism exhausted, the possibility of Drake filing against Kendrick Lamar directly cannot be completely dismissed. It is not the rational move, it is not the strategically sound move, but rationality and strategically soundness have not been defining features of Drake's decision-making recently.
And as someone who cares about this culture beyond just wanting to watch Drake fail, the idea of that lawsuit happening and the precedent it could attempt to set is genuinely concerning. Because even if it gets dismissed just as quickly, the process of defending against it has costs. The discovery that would be triggered has implications. And the signal it would send to every artist in hip-hop about what can happen when you win a beef against someone with resources and a grudge, that signal would linger long after the case is resolved. A Drake loss in court does not undo the damage the attempt itself would cause.
But right now, in this moment, and with this ruling on the record, what we have is clarity. Real, permanent, court-endorsed clarity. A diss track is protected expression. A rap battle is not a civil matter. And artistic opinion in hip-hop cannot be litigated into silence by the person that opinion is directed at. Those three principles were never supposed to be in question. They have been fundamental to what this culture is since the beginning. And Drake spent a year and enormous financial resources trying to overturn all three of them simultaneously. The court said no to every single one, and that answer is now public, permanent, and impossible to walk back.
And what I keep coming back to is just how much was at stake with this specific ruling, not just for Drake and Kendrick, but for every artist operating in this genre. Because the cultural authority to say difficult and uncomfortable things about powerful people is not a small thing to protect. It is the entire foundation of what makes rap meaningful as a form of expression. The genre was built by people who had no institutional platform and no legal protection. People who used music to say things that could not be said anywhere else. And watching that foundation get threatened by someone who benefited from it for his entire career, and then watching the court step in and refuse to let it be dismantled, is something worth genuinely appreciating.
And the culture's response to all of this, from the moment Not Like Us dropped through the entire year of lawsuit coverage, has been consistent and unified in a way that hip-hop rarely manages to be. The public did not need a judge to tell them what was right. They already knew. They voted with their streams, with their support for Kendrick, with their rejection of every narrative Drake tried to push through media proxies and legal filings. And what this dismissal does is simply confirmed in the official record what the culture already established on the ground. The two verdicts, cultural and legal, are now aligned, and together they represent one of the most complete and definitive outcomes we have ever seen in a public dispute of this kind.
And I do want to say directly, the people who held this conversation accountable throughout this entire process deserve real credit. Because covering something this complex, this legally dense, and this emotionally charged for close to a year is not easy. And staying engaged with it, pushing back against the misinformation, refusing to accept the spin, continuing to ask the right questions even when the answers were frustrating, that kind of sustained engagement from an audience is genuinely rare. And it mattered, because the reason this story got the attention it deserved is because enough people refused to let it be buried or reframed, and the culture is better for that.
And Drake deciding what to do next from this position is genuinely one of the most fascinating things to watch going forward, because the options available to him are narrower than they have ever been. The lawsuit is gone, the label relationship is fractured, the cultural goodwill is depleted, the Iceman rollout is stalled, and whatever he decides to do, whether it is dropping music, pursuing new legal action, finding a new proxy war to fight, it is going to have to be done without any of the institutional or cultural infrastructure that made his previous moves viable. Every next step is going to be more exposed and more difficult than the last, and that trajectory does not have a natural floor in sight.
To everyone who has been here through the full run of this lawsuit coverage, every update, every motion, every development over nearly a year, thank you. That kind of sustained attention to something this dense and this frustrating takes real commitment, and I genuinely appreciate every single one of you for it. Leave a like if you have not already. It makes a real difference, and it helps keep this coverage going. And if you want to watch what comes immediately after this, the reactions, the attempts to spin the dismissal, the OVO fanbase trying to find a way to frame a federal rejection as somehow a victory, check out the suggested video. Because the denial is going to be something to witness. And honestly, at this point in the story, watching them try to process this one might be the most entertaining chapter yet.